Hello, transitions. We're going to dive into lesson 5 today, and that's focusing on negative and zero exponents. Okay, so what we need to know is when we have a zero exponent, anything to the zero power gets us 1. So it kind of like cancels out. And then we can't have negative exponents in our answer. We have to manipulate that final answer to keep it positive. I think I briefly mentioned it in the previous lessons, but today we're going to, dive deeper into that. So for the lesson today, I've got a mix between multiplication rule and quotient rule, where we'll be adding and subtracting exponents, but we're also going to see what happens with these negative exponents. Okay, so let's dive in to example number 1 and kind of look at each part. Okay, so remember when focusing on multiplication rule, you're treating the big numbers, as normal. Okay, you've got a big 2 over here, you've got a big 3 here, you're going to multiply those together, and 2 times 3 gives me 6. Okay, so I'm starting off with a 6. Okay, well now I need to go ahead and look at my variables and just kind of analyze their exponents. Okay, so I see I've got a couple negative exponents, and then I see this x to the 0. Okay, well as I said before, x to the 0 just gives us 1, so we really don't need that variable at all. So anytime you see a variable to the 0 power, it's gone. Okay, so now we can go ahead and finish this problem with all the rest of the variables. Okay, so we can continue looking at the x variable. We see that the 0 went away, but we still have that x to the negative 2. So I'm going to go ahead and bring that x to the negative 2 over. And then I'm going to go ahead and combine my y's. Okay, I've got a y to the negative 2, and I've got a y to the 4. So negative 2 plus 4 gives me y squared. Okay, well when you're looking at this expression, we can see that it's all on the numerator. Kind of like with slope, if it's just one number, we can say it's over 1. And that's the same thing with exponents. We're going to say this is over 1. Okay, but as I said before, we cannot leave negative exponents in our answer. So I'm going to take a look at just this x to the negative 2 because that's the only one that's not acceptable right now. So in order to make a negative exponent positive, you have to flip its location. So for this example, x to the negative 2 is on the numerator. Well, if I want to make that positive, I need to switch it to the denominator. So my final answer here is I'm going to leave that 6 and the y squared on my numerator, but then on my denominator, I'm going x squared. I'm moving that x to the negative 2 on the bottom, and when I do that, it makes that positive. So my final answer here is 6y squared over x squared. Okay, so let's kind of dive deeper into number 2 and do that same process. Okay, so again, we're looking for big numbers, treating them as normal, and we can see that we just have a 2 here. So my answer will start off with a 2. Okay, then we can go ahead and see if our variables simplify at all. So our first variable is x, and there are no other x's, so I'm just going to keep that x to the negative 1. And then we can see that same thing with y. We've got that y squared, nothing to combine it with, so we'll keep it as y squared. Okay, so here's our answer, but remember, we're not finished because we have that negative exponent. So remember, it's all over 1, and I'm going to take that negative exponent and flip the location. So because it's on the top, I'm going to move it to the bottom and then make it positive. So my final answer here is 2y squared on the numerator, and then x to the first, or just x on the denominator. And notice there is a 1 on the denominator, so if you'd like to keep that 1 there, you can, but you do not have to write it. So that's my final answer for number 2. All right, number 3. Number 3, we can see that there are no big numbers, okay, so we don't have to multiply anything. So let's first just take a look at our m's. So with my m's, I have a m to the negative 2, and then I've got an m to the negative 4. So I'm going to add those together. So negative 2 plus negative 4 gives me m to the negative 6. Okay, and then we'll do that same process with our n variable. So our n, we have n squared, and we have n to the third. We add those together. 2 plus 3 gets me n to the 5th. Okay, so here's my answer, but remember, we got to keep it in the most simplified form, meaning I cannot keep that m to the negative 6 there. So remember, this is all over 1, and I'm going to take those negative exponents, so just my m to the negative 6, and move its location. So because it's on the top, in order for it to be positive, we need to bring it to the bottom. So I'm going to add an m to the 6th on the bottom. So my final answer, I've got an n to the 5th on top, and I've got m to the 6th on the bottom. So again, you can put that 1 there, but you don't necessarily have to. So that's our final answer for number 3. All right, 4, 5, and 6 are focusing on quotient rule, where we have to divide, and when we're dividing, we subtract our exponents. Okay, so let's first look at the big numbers, as always. So my big numbers here, I've got 4 divided by -4, which gives me -1. Okay, so as I mentioned before, we know that 0 exponents just equal 1. And in this problem, I have a couple 0 exponents. I have this 0 exponent on the top with x, and I have another one on the bottom with y. Okay, so we can get rid of those because we know they're 1. It's not going to change our answer, and then we can go ahead and simplify everything else. Okay, well, if you're looking at the variables, you have a y on the top and an x cubed on the denominator. Well, you can't simplify those at all, so just keep them where they are. So I'm going to keep that y on the top, keep that x to the 3rd on the denominator, and notice there are not any negative exponents, so that one is finished. All we had to do is get rid of those 0 exponents and divide the big numbers. So that's our final answer. All right, let's keep going on to number 5. Okay, so for number 5, again, we're doing quotient rule, so we'll be subtracting those exponents. But before we do that, let's just look at the numbers. Okay, I've got -2 on the top and -3 on the bottom. Let's divide those. 2 divided by 3 doesn't simplify, but we know a negative divided by a negative does get us a positive. So I'm going to have a 2 on the top and a 3 on the bottom, but it's going to be positive. And then we can look, are there any 0 exponents? And there are not. So now we can go ahead and simplify. So if I'm simplifying here, I'm going to look at my x's. I've got an x to the -3 on top, and I've got an x to the 2 on the bottom, or x squared. Remember, we subtract those. So that's like saying x to the -3 minus 2. Okay, well, when you simplify that, that simplifies to -5. So I'm going to have 2x to the -5 on top with a 3 on the bottom. But remember, we're still not done because we still have to take care of that y in this problem. But there aren't any other y's to combine it with, so we'll just bring that y to the -3 and keep it on top. Okay, but as I've said before, we cannot have negative exponents in our answers, so we have to change the location. So I've got a couple different negative exponents here. I've got this x to the -5 that needs to be moved to the bottom to make it positive, and I also have this y to the -3 that needs to be moved to the bottom to make it positive. Okay, so my final answer here is I'd have 2 on top, and on the denominator I'd have 3x to the 5th, y to the 3rd. So remember, anytime you change the location, it changes the sign. So that's my final answer for number 5. All right, let's take a look at number 6. Number 6, notice that the numbers are just these negatives. This is like -1 divided by -1. So we're just going to start with a positive 1 on top. Okay, and then we can go ahead and look at our m's. So I've got an m to the 2nd power on top, m to the 4th on the bottom. So I'm going m2 minus 4, which we get -2. So right now I've got 1m to the -2 on the numerator. And notice, if we look at our n's, I've got n squared on top, n squared on bottom. 2 minus 2 gets us 0. So those cancel out. Those are gone. So now I'm left with this 1m to the -2. But remember, we cannot have negative exponents in our answer. So this is like saying over 1. And I'm going to take that m to the -2 and move it on to the denominator to make that positive. So my final answer here is 1 on the numerator and then m squared on the denominator. And again, if you want to leave that 1 on the bottom, you totally can, but you don't have to. And that's our final answer.